Hello and welcome to the DebtCircle Sundown Brief. I'm Leela, bringing you today's comprehensive update from the Indian debt markets. Let's begin with the top 5 highest yield listed corporate bonds. Topaz 04 2026 recorded the highest yield at 19.84% with a trade value of 20.00 lakh rupees. Monedo Financial Services Private Limited recorded a yield of 17.00% with a trade value of 55.00 lakh rupees. Akara Capital Advisors Private Limited recorded a yield of 15.86% with a trade value of 9.00 lakh rupees. Best Capital Services Limited recorded a yield of 15.50% with a trade value of 300.00 lakh rupees. Monedo Financial Services Private Limited also recorded another listed bond transaction with a yield of 15.34% and a trade value of 300.00 lakh rupees. Now moving to the top 5 highest yield unlisted corporate bonds. Apex Homes Private Limited recorded the highest yield at 14.00% with a trade value of 4,246.67 lakh rupees. Embassy KSL Realty Ventures Private Limited recorded a yield of 13.50% with a trade value of 500.00 lakh rupees. Nuvama Wealth Finance Limited recorded a yield of 9.00% with a trade value of 30.00 lakh rupees. Another Apex Homes Private Limited bond recorded a yield of 8.7312% with a trade value of 2,500.00 lakh rupees. Anand Rathi Global Finance Limited recorded a yield of 8.00% with a trade value of 25.00 lakh rupees. Moving on to mutual fund debt transactions. Gross purchases stood at 16,114.70 crore rupees. Gross sales were 26,481.28 crore rupees. Net investments stood at negative 10,366.58 crore rupees. Month-to-date net investment for July stands at 1,401.270 crore rupees. Now let's look at foreign portfolio investor debt market investments. Under the general limit, gross purchases were 206.62 crore rupees. Under voluntary retention route or VRR, gross purchases were 0.00 crore rupees. Under the fully accessible route or FAR, gross purchases stood at 1,887.87 crore rupees. Gross sales under the general limit were 589.32 crore rupees. Gross sales under VRR stood at 40.60 crore rupees. Gross sales under FAR were 315.56 crore rupees. Net investment under the general limit was negative 382.70 crore rupees. Net investment under VRR was negative 40.60 crore rupees. Net investment under FAR stood at 1,572.31 crore rupees. For July month to date, net investment under the general limit stands at 3,228.16 crore rupees. Under VRR, it stands at negative 1,283.55 crore rupees. Under FAR, it stands at 6,624.57 crore rupees. For the calendar year 2026, year-to-date net investment under the general limit stands at 30,453 crore rupees. Under VRR, it stands at negative 990 crore rupees. Under FAR, it stands at 42,890 crore rupees. Let's move to the money market rates. Call rate stood at 5.35%. Tri-party repo stood at 5.20%. Basket repo stood at 5.29%. Special repo stood at 5.17%. Now the India government bond yield curve. 1-year government bond yield was 5.75%. 3 years stood at 6.21%. 5 years stood at 6.39%. 7 years stood at 6.59%. 9 years stood at 6.72%. 10 year also stood at 6.72%. 15 years stood at 6.96%. 30-year government bond yield stood at 7.32%. Moving to the Treasury bill yield and auction cutoff. 91-day Treasury bill stood at 5.30%. 182-day Treasury bill stood at 5.49%. 364-day Treasury bill stood at 5.66%. Now for the liquidity indicators. Net liquidity injected stood at negative 120,978 crore rupees. Standing Deposit Facility or SDF stood at 167,785 crore rupees. Marginal Standing Facility or MSF stood at 78 crore rupees. Moving to the MIBOR OIS rates, 1 year stood at 5.77%, 2 years stood at 5.92%, 3 years stood at 6.01%, 5 years stood at 6.17%. Now the modified MIFOR rates. 2 years stood at 6.83%, 3 years stood at 6.84%, 4 years stood at 0.00%, 5 years stood at 7.01%. Let's look at the currency market. The US dollar closed at 95.35 rupees compared with the previous close of 95.43 rupees. The euro closed at 108.96 rupees compared with the previous close of 109.12 rupees. The British pound closed at 127.96 rupees compared with the previous close of 127.84 rupees. The Japanese yen closed at 0.59 rupees, unchanged from the previous close of 0.59 rupees. The Chinese yuan closed at 14.06 rupees compared with the previous close of 14.03 rupees. Now for commodities and market indices. 24-karat gold with 99.9% purity was priced at 14,482 rupees per 10 grams compared with the previous price of 14,444 rupees per 10 grams. Silver was priced at 2,400 rupees per 10 grams compared with the previous price of 2,350 rupees per 10 grams. Crude oil was priced at $77.02 compared with the previous price of $78.53. The Sensex closed at 77,569.39 compared with the previous close of 76,741.82. The Nifty closed at 24,206.90 compared with the previous close of 23,962.80. Finally, under India Primary Issuance Corporate Bonds, Share India Securities Limited announced a corporate bond issuance of 50 crore rupees with a tenure of 16 months, offering a coupon of 10.50% and carrying a CARE Ratings Limited A+ rating. That concludes today's DebtCircle Sundown brief for 10th July 2026. Thank you for watching. I'm Leela. Stay informed with DebtCircle and have a wonderful evening.